All right, everyone, welcome to today's lecture. Today we are going to be beginning a brand new unit. We're going to be talking about Unit 4, which is photosynthesis. So today in day 1 of photosynthesis, we're just going to get into the intro of it, talk a little bit about photosynthesis, and then we'll get more into about that later. Later in the unit, we will be talking about cellular respiration, which is kind of like the opposite of photosynthesis, the second half to the carbon cycle. So we'll talk more about that later. And then finally, towards the end of the unit, we will be talking about mitosis. Just a couple of things to look out for. The photosynthesis part, we're going to be doing that for the next couple of classes, probably 3 or 4 classes. Cellular respiration will be in December, so we'll be after Thanksgiving break. We'll be looking into cellular respiration. So until then, we're going to be focusing pretty much only on photosynthesis. Now, to start off our notes today on photosynthesis, what I would like for you to do is access today's agenda in Canvas, which this should look familiar. It's up here on the top right, and there's a thing in the agenda called initial model. What I would like for you to do today for the first part of class is just to work on this initial model based off of your previous knowledge of photosynthesis. Now, it's okay if you don't have any knowledge on photosynthesis, if you didn't talk about this in middle school at all. Just try to do your best to talk about what do you think about trees, and then see how the life cycle goes from seed to tree. Where do all of these things tie in? Where do these vocabulary terms come in? So again, I would like for you to check out this bio unit 4 initial model. That's going to be right here. This is not an assignment. I want to clarify that again. This is not an assignment, but there is going to be a part 2 to this at the end of the unit that will be an assignment. So that doesn't mean you can't do this. You have to do this for the first part of class. And again, this is what it looks like here, the 2 pages that you'll see. Page 1 is looking at towering trees, talking about giant sequoia trees and how we go from a very small seed to one of the biggest trees that exists. And then the second part is, again, the same thing. How do plants grow from seed to tree? But what I would like for you to do is try to include as much detail as possible, trying to describe how does this process happen. And then I would like for you to include all of these words, or at least as many of these words as you possibly can, in your description. So go ahead and work on this. I'll give you a timer to work on this on the screen. So the video can keep on playing, and there'll be a timer on the screen. And then after that, we'll jump right into the notes. All right, so what I would like for everyone to do now is go ahead and put away your initial models. If you've already finished, that's great. What I would like for you to do is go to the agenda and download the notes for today. We are going to be talking about photosynthesis throughout the notes. So I'll give you 1 minute right now to go ahead and download those notes and get that set up in PDF Expert. All right, we're going to kick off this lecture with a 4 minute video from TED Ed. It's a really good video on photosynthesis and how it's really important in our food production. So we're going to watch this really quick and then we're going to get started with our notes.
Ever wonder where most of the food you eat every day comes from? Well, about 60% of the food you eat is carbohydrates. As you can probably tell from its name, carbohydrates contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But where do these atoms originally come from, and how do they join together to make delicious foods like fruits and pasta? It actually all starts with the air you are exhaling at this very minute, specifically the carbon dioxide molecules. Plants are going to breathe in this very same carbon dioxide through pores in their skin called stomata. Plants drink in water from their roots to get the needed oxygen and hydrogen atoms, and their electrons, in order to build carbohydrates. What is that thing? Well, that's a special plant organelle inside the leaves of plants called a chloroplast. It's green because of a special light-absorbing pigment called chlorophyll. Each leaf has about 44,000 cells, and every cell can have anywhere between 20 to 100 chloroplasts. That's up to 4,400,000 chloroplasts. By now, you've probably guessed that we're talking about the process of photosynthesis, and you might be wondering when the sun is going to make its entrance. Let's go back to that original molecule of water. The plant has to split this molecule of water so that it can get electrons from it. But the plant can't pull that water apart by itself. It needs help from the high-energy rays of the sun. So now that the chloroplast has all the building blocks, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons, it can use them to go through the rest of the steps of photosynthesis, to transform that original carbon dioxide gas into a simple carbohydrate called glucose, C6H12O6. That little glucose molecule then helps to build bigger and better carbohydrates like cellulose. Cellulose is a type of carbohydrate found in plants that our body cannot break down. We call it fiber, and we eat it in vegetables like lettuce, broccoli, and celery. Plants use cellulose to keep themselves strong. The plant could also turn that glucose into starch, a large molecule that stores energy for the plant. We love eating starch from plants like potatoes, corn, and rice. So you see, when we eat plants, we're actually benefiting from photosynthesis. The plant makes things like starch, which we eat and then break back down into glucose, the first form the plant made. Then, the mitochondria in our cells, powered by the oxygen we breathe, can turn glucose into pure energy molecules called ATP. ATP powers all work done by each and every one of your cells, things like communication, movement, and transport. But why do we have to turn that glucose into ATP? Well, think of it like this. You're excited to start your summer job at the local ice cream stand, but your boss has just told you that she is going to pay you in ice cream cones. What are you going to be able to do with those ice cream cones? Nothing, which is why you kindly ask to be paid in dollars. ATP is just like dollars. It is the currency that all cells of life use. while glucose is, well, kind of like ice cream. Even plants have mitochondria in their cells to break down the glucose they make into ATP. So, as you can see, humans and plants are intricately connected. The air we breathe out is used by plants to make the carbohydrates we enjoy so much. And, in the process, they are releasing the very same oxygen molecules we need to breathe in order that our mitochondria can break down our delicious carbohydrate meal.
All right, so before we get into talking about photosynthesis, the first question we want to ask ourselves is, what kind of organism does photosynthesis? Now, you've probably heard from a different science teacher before, maybe in middle school. You know that plants do photosynthesis. So, like, we've got this flower over here on the right side. Flowers, one type of plant, definitely does photosynthesis. All types of plants do photosynthesis, but they're not the only kind of organism. We also have algae, some bacteria, and there's some certain sulfur bacteria that can also do a photosynthesis. And basically, it's going to be any organism that needs to make its own energy using sunlight. So they are considered to be something called autotrophs. An autotroph is something that needs to make its own food. And these autotrophs make their food by gathering the sunlight using an organelle called the chloroplast, which we learned about, and that is going to be used to make food. So why do cells need to do photosynthesis? They need to be able to make their food in order to survive. All right, so what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process in which plants convert light energy into stored chemical energy. Now notice I didn't say sunlight because you can have plants grow under artificial lights, right? So it just has to be light energy. It doesn't have to be sunlight, although sunlight is the most plentiful source of light on our planet, and it's the number one source of energy for photosynthesis. It can be any form of light. Now, what do you need in order to get this photosynthesis started? Well, plants need carbon dioxide and they also need water. So those are going to be called the reactants. The reactants are also called the inputs. These are things that we need to input into the reaction. And then what do we get out of it? What's the output or the products? The products are going to be glucose, which is a form of sugar, and oxygen, O2. So again, here's the formal equation written down here. We've got carbon dioxide plus water through the process of photosynthesis, which is actually really complex. You don't really need to know the full steps of this, but all you need to know is that we have carbon dioxide and water that will give us glucose and oxygen in the presence of light energy. Okay, now where did all that light energy go in this reaction? The light energy is actually stored between the molecules, between the atoms rather, of this one glucose molecule. So it's now stored in the bonds of this one glucose molecule. Oxygen here ends up being a byproduct of photosynthesis. Plants don't actually need oxygen, so it gets kind of eliminated out. It gets expelled out of the plant, and then anything that breathes oxygen can actually benefit from that. So this is the whole process of photosynthesis. I definitely encourage you to know this equation. It'll show up eventually on some form of quiz or test in the future, where you have 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 waters will give you 1 glucose molecule, and glucose is C6H12O6, plus 6 oxygens. Okay, so that's a full equation for photosynthesis. All right, why do plants and animals need glucose? Well, glucose is the ultimate form of energy, or it's the first fuel source to produce energy. The energy source that plants and animal cells use is ATP. We've learned that before. But how do we get ATP? Well, the first step is we need to convert glucose. And there's like a whole bunch of different processes that we go from glucose to ATP. It's not just a simple arrows like this. But there's a process called cellular respiration, which we'll learn about in a few weeks, that will convert the glucose to ATP. So both plants and animals convert the glucose into ATP using cellular respiration. And the big difference, though, is that the pig here, for instance, or like animals, has to consume glucose by eating it, whereas a plant has to make its own glucose. That's the main difference here. So what is different in how plants and animals get their glucose? Heterotrophs and animals, they have to consume it, they have to eat it, and plants, like autotrophs, they have to make it themselves. So we're talking about photosynthesis and what actually it gets involved in this whole process, what goes into it, or what are the reactants. Plants absorb light energy with the green pigment called chlorophyll in their leaves. Okay, so there's a pigment inside of each of these cells called chlorophyll, and that chlorophyll is actually really good at absorbing light. It absorbs every single color of light except for one specific color, and that color is green. So it does not absorb green. It actually reflects the green off of it, and that's actually why plants look green. It's because that green light is not being absorbed. And plants will breathe in carbon dioxide, and they will also intake water. The carbon dioxide actually enters through the leaves of a plant through a specific pore on the bottom called a stomata. So we'll learn about that in just a little bit. So plants actually do kind of breathe, not maybe with lungs like animals do, but they do have pores that let gases diffuse through the leaves. So when a tree loses its leaves, like let's say for winter time, it's actually not being able to do photosynthesis very well, and the plant actually stops growing for the most part during that time. The water actually comes in through the roots if we're talking about something that's planted in soil. And that's basically it for the reactants. We have carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which we have lots of carbon dioxide. And then we also have water coming in through the roots. So let's talk a little bit more about chlorophyll, the specific pigment we were looking at in the leaf. Chlorophyll is a green pigment found in chloroplast. What is a chloroplast? That's the organelle where we see photosynthesis. That's the site of photosynthesis. Chlorophyll is inside of it, and chlorophyll allows a chloroplast to absorb red and blue light very efficiently, which then energizes and triggers the process of photosynthesis. Green light is not absorbed, like I mentioned before. It is actually reflected off, and this is why we see plants as green. Now you might be asking, okay, why only red and blue light? Why not like yellow or orange or purple? Well, if you know anything about like light combination, or like if you've maybe learned a little bit about like how screens work or RGB lights, you can actually make every single color of light using only 3 colors. You can use red, green, and blue, and different combinations of those lights will give you pretty much every single color that you can imagine. So for our eyes, we only see different combinations of red, green, and blue. And so the plants actually kind of use that same principle. They will absorb red and blue lights, but they will not absorb green light. And that is why we see green light. Okay? Chlorophyll, you don't need to know what chlorophyll looks like, but if you want to see just how complex chlorophyll looks like on a molecular scale, this is kind of what it looks like. All right, let's go back to talking about those stomata and what those are. These are going to be the tiny pores in the plant leaves that allow for gas exchange to occur. So they're usually on the underside of plants, but they can be on the top side as well. But on the underside of the plants, again, you'll have like these tiny little pores. If you use even just like a magnifying glass, sometimes you can see these pores. And carbon dioxide will enter through the pore and oxygen will exit. Okay, and these pores usually stay open, but sometimes a plant might close it in order to conserve water vapor from coming out of these pores as well. So not only can carbon dioxide enter and oxygen exit, but sometimes water vapor can escape from the pores. And that's not necessarily good for the plant to be losing water. So in some cases, some plants have like a waxy cuticle on the bottom to protect it from losing too much water. Like if you think about like a cactus or a pine tree, those things are kind of susceptible to losing water. So we want to make sure that they're not losing water and they keep their stomata closed sometimes, and sometimes they keep them open, like in the nighttime. Transpiration is the process by which plants move water from their roots to their leaves. So we've talked about the carbon dioxide and where that enters. Now the part where the water comes in is through the roots. Carbon dioxide comes through the stomata and the leaves, and the roots bring in the water. So these are, again, the 2 reactants for photosynthesis, the carbon dioxide and the water. And now we've learned basically where the reactants come from. One other point I want to mention is the water actually can move up against gravity because of cohesive and adhesive properties of water. If you remember doing the water property lab, the cohesion and the adhesion of water allows it to move up. If you've ever like taken a piece of paper towel and you touched it against the water and you saw how the water can kind of climb up the paper towel or the napkin, that's kind of like what's happening here, but on a really, really small level. And the smaller the channels are, the higher the water can go up. So this is how like really tall trees are able to get water from the roots all the way up to the upper leaves. All right, so the chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. One leaf contains millions of cells, and then each cell contains anywhere from 20 to 100 chloroplast. And each chloroplast is doing dozens and dozens of reactions in order to create a glucose. And there's a complex series of chemical reactions occurring during photosynthesis. This is something that I have my AP classes actually learn, all this stuff here, the Calvin cycle and NADPH and a whole bunch of different molecules that are involved in this process. But basically, you don't need to know any of that. And all you really need to know is that this is where the reactions happen. So we have our carbon dioxide and we have our water. And inside of the chloroplast, there's a bunch of reactions that happen with light. And then the end result, this is what you really need to know, is we get glucose and oxygen out of that. So water and carbon dioxide broken down, and then the individual atoms are then rearranged, rebuilt using the light energy, and then we get a glucose and oxygen out of this whole thing. So what we're going to do now is watch a short video on the inside of a leaf, and this is actually a really cool visualization of how all of this works. So let's go ahead and check this out. Okay, so this is the final balanced equation for photosynthesis. This is something that we looked at closer to the beginning of class, but we've got 6 carbon dioxides, 6 water. You need to have sunlight and chlorophyll in order to do this reaction. And then we end up with 1 glucose molecule, and glucose is C6H12O6, and 6 oxygen molecules. And again, the oxygen is a byproduct, and that's going to get expelled out. The plants don't need the oxygen. That'll eventually just go into the atmosphere for animals to breathe. So you'll definitely need to know this entire balanced equation for any future assessment. All right, so the products of photosynthesis. Oxygen is released through the stomata back into the atmosphere, like I've mentioned. Glucose stays in the plant and becomes the plant's body. So the glucose, not only is it a fuel source that's used in cellular respiration, like I mentioned before, it's also used for the plant's structure. So the plant builds its stems, its leaves, everything inside of the plant is built from the glucose molecules. Glucose molecules are combined, kind of like small little Legos. You combine them one on top of another to form these fibers called cellulose. And these sturdy fibers that make up most of the plant tissue basically forms like all of the tissue inside of the plant. So that cellulose fiber is basically made from glucose. And where did that come from? That came from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it's kind of crazy to think about. If you ever look at like a really big tree, a tree has a lot of cellulose in it. And obviously it's a very solid object. But if you think about it, all of that mass came from air. It came from the carbon dioxide. It came from the atmosphere. So it's kind of interesting to think about that sometimes. In this equation that we see here, we're just going to do a quick review. What are the reactants? What are the products? The reactants are basically everything on the left of an arrow in a reaction written like this. So we have this arrow indicating the reaction happening. Anything to the left of it, those are going to be the reactants. Okay, everything to the right, those are going to be the products. So this is the input, the reactants, and then here are the products, the output. So that basically concludes our intro to photosynthesis. We'll get into more details later. What I would like for you to do now is, if you haven't finished in class, if there's a little bit of time left, what I would like for you to do is just go back and work on that initial model, maybe adjust things a little bit, but don't change your answer for like this multiple choice question. Many people get this wrong. I would say that maybe 10% of students initially get this right. The important thing is to understand at the end of the unit where all the mass comes from. But you can continue working on this part, this description, if you haven't finished that yet on your initial model. So go ahead and you can work on that right now.